In colonial America from early 1692 to 1693, Massachusetts witnessed a bizarre and tragic phenomenon known as the Salem witch trials. Christians at this time held very superstitious and fearful beliefs that the devil worked through various people, known as witches, in exchange for their loyalty. In January of 1692, the 9-year-old daughter and 11-year-old niece of Reverend Samuel Parris began to exhibit alarming behavior. They contorted themselves in odd positions, screamed, threw things, and claimed that they felt itching and crawling sensations over their skin. A doctor was summoned and reasoned that the only explanation could be bewitchment. Soon after, other young girls began to exhibit the same strange behavior. When pressured by 2 local magistrates to name the witches who had cursed them, the girls named 3 women, all of whom were oppressed, outcast members of society in some way. Tituba, the Paris' Caribbean slave, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly, impoverished woman. While all women initially pled their innocence, Tituba eventually confessed and claimed that several other witches were also working with her on behalf of the devil in order to harm the Puritans, setting off an increasingly paranoid stream of events which resulted in the accusations of many more townsfolk. Bridget Bishop was the first woman convicted of witchcraft and was sentenced to death by hanging. The trials themselves were short-lived, eventually subsiding in the spring of 1693, but the damage had been done. Over 200 people had been accused, 20 people were executed, and 5 others, including 2 infant children, died in prison as a result of this seemingly unimaginable hysteria. In the world of dance, we find an unlikely connection with the intense, religiously fused and chaotic social circumstances that spurred the hysteria of the Salem witch trials. Crump developed as a form of street dance in South Central LA in 1992, ignited by the LA riots, and came to notoriety in the early 2000s. Crump's co-founders, Cesar Tight Eyes Willis and Joe Artis Big Mijo Ratti, saw the dance as a way for them to escape gang life and to release anger, aggression, and frustration positively in a non-violent way. The word crump is also a backronym for Kingdom Radically Uplifted Mighty Praise, illuminating its Christian-based origins and the deeper value it holds in helping the oppressed to cope with difficult circumstances. Using frenetic and aggressive movements such as chest pops, stomps, arm swings, and kill-offs, this almost entirely freestyle dance form practically explodes out of the dancer as if summoned by another force. Despite its aggressive appearance, there is a deep sense of unity and dialogue that is created within the world of crumping, uniting dancers of all races and genders in a supportive culture that lifts one another up while using the movement itself to express one's inner demons.
Shortly after World War II, a political movement known as McCarthyism began to take hold. Named after Senator Joseph McCarthy, McCarthyism was the practice of accusing and investigating high-ranking individuals of disloyalty and corruption towards the U.S. government. Rash accusations that communists were trying to take over America were made by fear-stricken Republican committees that pushed their panic into the general public. One example of McCarthyism is known as the Hollywood Blacklist. This consisted of banning American screenwriters, actors, directors, musicians, and other entertainment professionals from employment for alleged communist ties. In 1950, the House of Un-American Activities Committee published a pamphlet called Red Channels, which consisted of 151 names of the accused entertainment workers. The careers of these individuals were incredibly damaged, leaving some unable to find work years after the blacklist had ended. Another example of McCarthyism is the Lavender Scare, a mass discharge of gay and lesbian federal workers in the 1950s. Senator McCarthy made allegations that communists had infiltrated the government, but more importantly, that gay men and lesbian women, or sex perverts as he had addressed them, were even more dangerous due to the likelihood of them being blackmailed by foreign enemy agents to surrender government secrets in order to keep their sexuality a secret. He labeled homosexuals as security risks, communist sympathizers, created a fear of homosexuals in the general public, and signed an executive order that led to approximately 5,000 federal employees being fired and banned from working for the state. Amongst those fighting these terrible political standards was the New Dance Group, a group formed in 1932 that focused on combining revolutionary fights for equality, primarily emphasizing communist thought, with modern dance. Costing only a dime, students who attended their workshops would receive an hour of dance class, an hour of improvisation based on a specific social theme, and an hour of discussion, typically on Marxist ideas. Having such a broad range of dancers within the group, the only rules for choreographers was that the work must be of a matter important to them, and it must be executed in such a way that the audience would surely understand the fire behind it. The dancers of the NDG created experimental collaborations of work, performing them and marching along at protests and parades, bringing attention to social and political matters such as race and gender equality, workers' rights, and the ridiculous tactics of the House of Un-American Activities Committee. This formula of pushing aggressive issues with such high levels of artistic requirements made the NDG a leader amongst other radical dance groups of their kind. Some of their works included On the Barricades, Hunger, and Time is Money, which was choreographed by Jane Dudley and set to a communist writer's poem. Their legacy remained potent by exemplifying just how powerful dance can be in the fight to increase awareness of revolutionary ideas.
In 1956, a counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, began by the FBI to survey, infiltrate, and interfere in American political groups. Several campaigns were conducted using covert and illegal methods. COINTELPRO specifically targeted activists such as Martin Luther King Jr., who the FBI believed posed a threat to national security. COINTELPRO was under the control of J. Edgar Hoover, who was also the director of the FBI at the time. Under Hoover's authority, William C. Sullivan, FBI agent, was given full reign to investigate, record, and infiltrate all areas of King's life. This was done in order to obtain evidence that could be used to dismantle or discredit King's political activism. After King's famous speech, I Have a Dream, the FBI viewed him as a national threat that would bring instability to the U.S. government. King was then threatened, called a notorious liar, and even received death threats telling him to commit suicide or else. After King's death, the government continued to persuade some people to attack his memory and blocked any efforts made to honor him. COINTELPRO specifically targeted black communities to install fear, suppression, and hate. Oftentimes, they would initiate debates between collaborative organizations and spread false rumors in order to break down united black people. The idea of resistance against social and racial norms would once again be challenged through art such as dance. The Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater is at the forefront of the most renowned schools in the world of dance. The company started with a group of 30 dancers in 1958 by choreographer Alvin Ailey. Ailey created a piece known as Revelations, which would become the company's breakthrough in success and international acclaim. During the conception of Ailey's dance company, society deemed that blacks were only able and encouraged to perform native dances. Ailey produced a masterpiece that allowed blacks to show off their prowess and fully abled bodies in the world of modern dance. His company also united black men and women on stage, allowed the audience to witness black culture with a new perspective, and fought to break social barriers at a time in history when blacks were openly discriminated and persecuted. Just like Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I Have a Dream, has remained a beacon of hope for social reformation, so too does the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater.
And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
In 1972, the President Richard Nixon was creating hope for America. This hope led to his re-election. On June 17, 1972, there was a break-in in the Watergate office in Washington, D.C. The burglars were arrested and an investigation occurred. Washington Post reporters published a series of articles claiming that Nixon's team was a part of this break-in. The Senate got involved and accused the president of planning and later covering up the break-in. It was found out that Nixon recorded almost all conversations he had in his office. Nixon was asked to release these tapes but declined. The Supreme Court stepped in and said Nixon could not decline because he may have committed a crime. Nixon turned in the tapes and it was discovered that he was in fact a part of the burglary. He later resigned to avoid impeachment. Just as the government broke the law and crossed barriers into unknown territory, so did modern dance. modern dance took off the traditional point shoes of ballet to dance in bare feet. The dance became about the space around the performers instead of about the dancers themselves. Stories were no longer told on stage, rather, movement expressed emotion. The technique of modern dance was different. Spines twisted and curved and moved in ways audiences had never seen. While Cunningham's technique focused on the space around you, as well as spine work, Martha Graham's technique focused on contraction and release. Ballet defied gravity, while modern dance gave into it. America had never seen a president like Richard Nixon, and had never experienced a dance as new and as different as modern.
The Patriot Act was signed into law by President George Bush on October 26, 2001, as a response to the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. The act allows federal officials greater authority in tracking and intercepting communications, both for purposes of law enforcement and foreign intelligence gathering. It gives the Secretary of the Treasury regulatory powers to combat corruption of U.S. financial institutions. For foreign money laundering purposes, it more actively works to cross our borders to foreign terrorists and to detain and remove those within our borders. Critics counter the act gives the government too much power, threatens civil liberties, and undermines the very democracy it seeks to protect. The impact of 9/11 not only affected politics, but the earth as well. The Table of Silence Project 9/11 is a multicultural prayer for peace, realized through a transcendent ceremony for 100 dancers swathed in white, that carries out the vision of contemporary choreographer Jacqueline Puglisi and artist Rosella Bast. The site-specific work is titled after Basta's installation of 100 terracotta plates arranged around a symbolic banquet table uniting humanity. Puglisi transformed the concept into a moving meditation, a poetic call for tolerance and peace in our world. They have a vision to create an opportunity for the world community to commemorate the loss of life and the bravery of all those affected by the act of terror, which occurred on 9/11. At the same time, this event celebrates our determination and the strength of our belief in freedom for all humanity.